You're listening to NorthWoods Church Matters, a podcast of NorthWoods Church in Evansville, Indiana, where we discuss why the local church matters and things that matter to the local church. I'm your host, Matt Higgins. All right, well, welcome to the NorthWoods Church Matters podcast. We are excited to have our new crew here. We've got Ivan McDonald.
Glad to be back.
And Carey Bachting.
Hey.
We didn't fire either one of you after last week. You did a fantastic job last time. And as a special treat, we have our lead pastor, Bobby Pell, rocking the Alabama gear.
It's true. I'm here. Roll Tide.
We're excited about our topic tonight. We've had some questions in the church about work and vocation in terms of topics like, what do I do if I hate my job? Should I go into Christian service?
Is that you? Oh. you hate your job?
That's personal, Bobby. Personal.
I just thought I'd ask.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So, boy, that really threw me up. There's sometimes this summer when I was in Utah, I was like, man, I could just get a tiny house here. But I think we all have those type of moments. But people that are thinking about jobs biblically, and am I serving God the best with my job? And because it's the place where we spend a good majority of our life as adults. And so it's a big decision, and we don't want to waste the moments that God has given us. So we'll start off with a fun question tonight. We're now changing things up, Bobby, that we're going to start off with a fun question first.
Good. I like fun.
Yeah. First fun question is, since we're doing this on work, what was your first job?
Yeah, my first job I was a bag boy at the Red Food Store back when they did people who bag groceries. That was my first job.
Paper or plastic?
Back then there was no choice.
Yeah, it was just paper.
Just paper.
Just paper.
Yeah, we didn't care about the environment. We just did paper. I took it all the way out to the cars and got tips. Tips were good. You were $3.35 an hour was my pay. That always makes me feel old when I say it. And then you got tips. And my wife does not want me to bag our groceries today because I'll put the eggs at the wrong place and put the bread at the wrong place. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, you go, babe, you go. But that was my first job.
Yeah, I blew my daughter's mind recently when I told her that people used to come out and pump your gas for you and wash your windows. There's a whole generation of people that are just like, what? That's just crazy that someone would pump your gas for you.
Right.
Carey, what was your first job?
My first technical job would be umpiring baseball. But
what?
Yeah, umpiring pitching machine baseball. That was a for cash job. We would collect the cash literally from the butter tray of the refrigerator in the concession stand. My first W-2 job, if you will, was a car wash.
Oh, cool.
Okay. Cash job counts.
My first unpaid jobs were farm kid. And then actually worked at CFC, unpaid, when I was super young, cleaning, maintenance, just doing that kind of stuff. I mean, I can remember sweeping the entire floor of the sanctuary with a big mop. So yeah, doing all that fun stuff, playing in the catwalk.
Cool. Yeah, churches, if there's one thing that churches is good at, is providing unpaid jobs, like hiring people to do jobs and then not paying them for it. We do that well.
I think that's called volunteerism.
Yes.
Volunteerism to a point.
Is that what we're doing right now?
Yeah, I know this. You're not getting paid.
Yeah, I don't think I mentioned pay. My first job was a friend and I. We had a Wednesday night dinner at our very traditional Southern Baptist church, and we washed dishes after every Wednesday night dinner. And for some reason, they trusted us with a set of keys to the church, which was a mistake because we spent a lot of time on the roof of the church and in the attic and all these places we shouldn't be. But as a teenager, you're just like, hey, we can go anywhere in the church, so let's go everywhere. I think they found out about it that our band's first album cover was on the roof of the church. And then we started handing it out around church. I think the keys were revoked after that, actually. All right, so let's get into the meat of it, and let's ask some harder questions.
So how does work glorify God?
I think God gives man the gift of work during the creation. So you see, God put Adam in the midst of this garden, and he's told to work it. And there's great responsibility that God gives to Adam, one in the creation process. You see in Genesis 1, God is creator. And then that role is handed off in a way to Adam, that he's been told to be fruitful and multiply. And then he's given authority over the earth to work it and to care for it. And so God hands over authority to him too. And so we were created to do work. And even the woman, when she's introduced in Genesis 2, she's described as a helper or a helpmate. And that's a word that there's a job that the husband is doing and the woman is working alongside of her husband in a role that is supporting. And so you see from the beginning that work glorifies God. And so I think a caveat to that is we're called to glorify God in everything that we do, not just work. And so we can't say, while I'm working, I'm going to glorify God. But when I get home, man, it's all done. We got to remember 1 Corinthians 10:31. So whatever you eat or drink or whatever you do, it all to the glory of God. And so for some of us, that's reverse too. It's like, well, while I'm at church, I'm going to glorify God. But when I'm at home or when I'm at work, forget about it. These people that I work with, does God know these people that I work with? I can't glorify him here at work. So we make it our aim to please him in every role, in every circumstance.
I was going to quote the 1 Corinthians 10 passage as well. How does eating glorify God? Whether therefore you eat or drink or whatever you do, all to the glory of God. How does drinking glorify God? Evidently, you can eat to the glory of God. You can drink to the glory of God. You can work to the glory of God. There's no question that God designed to work for man. I believe, this is not a part of the question, but I believe that there will be a physical millennial reign one day, and I believe that in that physical millennial reign, work will happen. I believe that we will not get away from work because that was a part of God's plan before sin happened in Genesis chapter 3. The 10 Commandments, the fourth of the 10 Commandments in Exodus chapter 20, in verse number 8, it says, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is the Sabbath to the Lord your God." Well, we put an emphasis on the statement, on the seventh day is the Sabbath. But part of that, it clearly says, you're going to work for 6 days. We can rush past that if we would like, but the Sabbath only makes sense, except that God's plan is that we work hard. So you and I are to work, recognizing there are other passages we'll talk about in a little while, that we do this honoring God wherever it is we work.
Yeah. So I'll go ahead and throw in a question and see if we agree on this. Do you believe in the final state in heaven that people will work?
I do.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I think we see the pictures of people gathering around the throne and worshiping in heaven, but I don't think that's all we do. I think that we have the ability to enjoy one another, to work, and to do all these different things. Now, what those jobs will be or what our roles will be, who knows?
That's right.
I have no idea.
That's right.
Hopefully my job is playing with a dog. That'd be great.
I'll add to that, I believe we'll be learning as well. We are not omniscient.
I hadn't thought about that before, the concept of working in heaven, right? I think a lot of people have sort of this perception of just, oh, I'm on the couch relaxing. God is great. God is good. What can go wrong? And I don't know, it's blowing my mind to think about what work, heavenly work looks like.
Yeah.
I think there's pictures in scripture that the earth is really a testing of how we handle work and how we handle responsibilities. And God's going to use how we handle that, I think, to maybe place us in positions
Of authority.
of authority in heaven.
That's right.
Yeah. Will there be IT in heaven? Will you have to tell people turn it on and turn
Please
it
no
off?
printers.
Yes, no
Please
printers.
no printers.
If there's a printer in heaven, ooh, man, I'm out of IT.
But you'll have infinite patience, though, in heaven. And so when the printers don't work,
Not for printers.
all the printers go down below, is what you're saying. Okay.
So how does work help me grow in holiness?
Well, Romans 8:28 through 29 says, "And we know that all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. For those God foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. For better or for worse, work is in the all things." That God uses all things, including our work, to better conform us to the image of Christ. And part of the growth at holiness is God allows us to go through hardship and difficult circumstances. And some of that intentionally is the pain or the joy of working with other people, which seems to be a lot of friction that I feel like people have in work isn't so much what they're doing, but the people that they work with. And that's a skill. And I think God allows us to be honed by that, and including difficult situations at work.
I'm trying to remember the author who wrote the book about sacred marriage.
Yeah.
Gary
Thomas.
Gary Thomas. Thank you, Gary Thomas. So the thesis of sacred marriage is the purpose of marriage is not to make you happy, but to make you holy. He wrote the book Sacred Parenting. The purpose of your children is not to make you happy, but to make you holy. It would be easy to simply take the same principle and speak of work. The purpose of work is not your happiness. The purpose of work is God's holiness in your life.
Yeah.
And because we can say that about everything. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, in verse number 3, says, this is the will of God, your sanctification. Your sanctification is God's will. He's conforming us to the image of his Son. God's plan is shaping us to be more like Jesus, but part of that as well, 1 Thessalonians 4:3, is removing us from sexual immorality. It's taking us out of sin and pressing us into holiness. Well, if I'm working 40 hours a week, that's about a fourth of my week. And when you add on top of that, let's say I sleep 8 hours a night, that's 96 hours are tied between sleep and work. That's more than half of my week. Do we really think that God is not going to use work for a Christian to shape us into Jesus and to shape us into holiness? It would be crazy to think such. This is why, from a church history perspective, there used to be this conversation about the secular and the sacred, and that you sort of have church life and work life. And that is a complete false dichotomy. That is totally wrong.
Yeah.
We live in a world that is simply God's, and it's all sacred. He is at work no matter where I'm at, whether I'm here on Sunday or whether I'm in Matt's office on a Wednesday night shooting a podcast.
Mm-hmm. And I think the holiness thing is important to put everything else in perspective, that Gary Thomas type of perspective. Everything is, God is created in order to lead us into holiness. And so if we have that attitude, then it changes everything. But also knowing that the primary calling that God has for us is to be better conformed to the image of Christ, first to know him, then be better conformed to the image of Christ, and then one day be glorified to him. And so the most important questions that we can ask in life are not, who should I marry, or where do I work, or what car do I drive, or how many kids should I have? The most important question is, how can I know Jesus? How can I be better conformed to Jesus? And then looking forward to the hope that we have in Christ, that one day he's going to return for us. And so I think those are the things that help us put everything else in perspective.
Matt, you shared that you worked in the public sector before coming to ministry.
Yeah.
Can you share, how do the demands of our jobs, and especially those like high-paced ones, fast-paced ones, and high-stress ones, impact our spiritual lives?
So I think I mentioned this in the last podcast, I am a recovering workaholic, and part of that is experience that I had in the public sector. Lots of weird hours, lots of late hours, lots of immaturity by myself, spiritual immaturity as well. And I think that there's a lot of temptations in work that people have. One is you find your identity in work. This is who I am. And if I am not this, then I am nothing. I really enjoyed, as a part of my secular career, climbing the ladder. Like, my status is improving. Like, I'm one rung away from being county administrator or city manager, which is what I wanted to do. And I found lots and lots of pride and joy in doing those things. But also keeping up with a reputation. Like, people know who I am, especially in public sector work. People know you're the planning commissioner walking around the grocery store, trying to keep up appearances. But then the pride of everything falls on you, and then that everything depends on what you're doing. And so there's so many pitfalls that you can fall in. But I don't think that those are just the private sector. I think those are church life too. Everything that I just mentioned, I struggle with in church life too, as well. There's a great book on church life and the pastor by Paul Tripp, Dangerous Calling. And those things that I just talked about are the things that Paul Tripp talks about in Dangerous Calling and some of the dangers of pastoring. And so I think if you're not in pastoring, you forget sometimes this is our job. And so we have just struggles, the same struggles that other people do with our job.
Dangerous Calling speaks to the issue of how much are we in the lobby after church living for someone walking up saying, "Great sermon."
Hmm.
And in comparison to living for being faithful to the text, irrespective of how you feel.
Yeah.
And so I think it's great for a congregation to have Pastor Appreciation Month. I think that's a great thing. But whether or not you get a card or not, Dangerous Calling in Paul Tripp's book is in effect saying, you're gonna do what's right, irrespective of anything. And I think that's really the picture behind that, because there is a temptation that you start living for the accolades of others. And in denominational life, it can even go to, well, if our church grows, then people start knowing us, which, by the way, this church is known. But you have to ask yourself, do you care that the president of the International Mission Board knows that you exist? Or do you care that God knows you exist? And where is your hope in? And then go forward from there.
Yeah. Let me share a bad story about myself. That I think there was a moment that I realized that I had a problem. And when I realized I had a problem, there was a subdivision development that was going in the town that I was planning commissioner at. And it was hot and heavy. And the things were being written in the paper. There were accusations that were being made about me being on the take. It was written in the newspaper. There are articles about the planning commissioners corrupt, et cetera, et cetera. There's no way that he was going to do this without him being on the take. And it was just boiling over. And we finally had the hearing on this particular project. And this lady just laid me out in terms of, this guy has no idea what he's talking about. And it just lit a fire in me. And after that meeting, I got in that woman's face and I cussed her out in the middle of the public hearing. And then we were told to cool it off by one of the public officials. And then we took it out to the parking lot and we continued yelling at each other. And we were there for probably 2 hours just yelling at each other. That was not my finest hour, but that's when I started to realize, man, I've got this problem. Why am I going off on this woman? Well, because she's trying to tarnish my reputation. Well, who cares? But that's what I cared about at that point in time.
Yeah. And that can be, I can see where that can be intoxicating in a way, seeking that self-affirmation. In my job, I produce at times some high stakes reports, and there is a high that comes with that at times. And so, yeah.
I fixed this printer.
Oh, no. I have never fixed a printer and been proud of it.
Ivan, have you ever gotten a high from fixing a printer?
Actually, yeah.
How does work help us fulfill our purpose?
To set up some parameters for this one as well, I think that the first thing God does is God gives different people different talents and different abilities. And we have to differentiate that from spiritual gifts. Like, everybody in the world is created differently, has different abilities, different talents, different things that innately God has endowed to them. But then there's another level when we become Christians, that Christians receive spiritual gifts from the Lord and able to serve the church in some way and to make disciples and to evangelize to people. And so we have to take those things in consideration where we work. Like, even if we're lost people who don't have spiritual giftings, those are people that are talented in certain ways. And there's some people that just know how to fix a printer. And then there's some people that they're more adept at fixing a car or whatever role God has given them. And that's part of the challenge of work, is knowing, okay, so, you don't have a lightning bolt from heaven saying, this is where you should work. I think God allows us to struggle through that. And that's part of the holiness thing as well. But it's a challenge to figure out, okay, so what is my purpose? I think that's one of the great existential questions everybody struggles with.
Yeah. So this is not a simple question for me. And so I'm just going to open a quick dialogue here.
Yeah.
Would you say that every person has the same purpose who's a follower of Jesus?
Yes.
And how would you describe that?
I would say that it's what I mentioned before, which is to know him, which is the purpose of all people.
Right.
Not everybody achieves that.
Right.
But I'd say to grow in personal holiness and grow in sanctification is the primary purpose of the Christian.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
I would say, how does work help us do that? So if you think of that, Jesus said that the greatest commandment is love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbors yourself. That the principle behind that is where do I see my neighbors 40 hours a week? I see my neighbors 40 hours a week at work. Yeah. And so I'm actually going to see in 1 week my neighbors at work, in my case, more than what I will my physical neighbors in 52 weeks. So for me, my neighbors that I am to love are going to be the primary examples that I am to demonstrate Jesus to. It's going to be at work. Now, for some people, that's a very small group of people that they hang out with and that they have interaction with on a weekly basis. For some people, that it goes from a handful to a dozen. For some, it may be 30 or 40. I don't know. But whatever your people are at work, that those people are there to help accomplish God's purpose of holiness in your life and thank the great commandment. I love God with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength, love my neighbor as myself. That's the picture. That's how I see it.
Yeah. And I think another level on top of that, I'll use an illustration from the TV show The Office, because that's the greatest show that's ever existed. So in the beginning seasons of The Office, Michael Scott, the boss, he keeps pushing this idea that we are a family as a workplace. And everybody else is like, I want to have nothing to do with this idea. And by the end of the show, in the end seasons, you start to realize, okay, maybe this is more of a family. And biblically, our family is our brothers and sisters in Christ in the church. But there is something to the effect of these are the people that we're spending 40 hours a week with, that they become the people that God has called us to weep with, to rejoice with, to celebrate with, to go to hospitals with, to share life with, and to evangelize and hopefully one day disciple. And it's a meaningful thing that God has given us, the gift of being able to form relationships with people in this way.
That's good.
Matt, what if my workplace is unhealthy or lacks Christian ethics?
Like NorthWoods?
I think you should talk to your boss.
I think it's important to remember, like, you are going to encounter lost people, sinful people, and people in willful rebellion to the Lord anywhere that you go. And workplaces are just like any other place. And I think one mistake that often people make is, I want to go work for a Christian workplace. And they think that there's never going to be problems or hostility, or everybody's going to be eating ice cream together and playing My Little Pony. I mean, it's just going to be really...
That would neither... My Little Pony, you lost me.
Yes.
But I'm for eating ice cream with you, but
we can eat ice cream together. So no one is playing My Little Pony here at NorthWoods. But my point is that even in Christian work environments, there are sinful people there too. And so a couple questions in light of that I would ask is, are you showing compassion and gospel hope to the lost? Instead of turning away from lost people when they act like lost people, Jesus says to these people that when he saw a crowd of lost people, he says, when he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Maybe you're not called to be a pastor, but maybe God has put you in a place to shepherd people towards the truth.
That's good.
And I think that's a question to think through. Another question is, are you showing the grace, mercy, and forgiveness and patience of the Lord to others? That sometimes that's what's called for in the midst of this. It can be incredibly personal or incredibly heated, but maybe God is using us to show that type of compassion, to show what God has done in our hearts. But then there's also the thought of, are you pursuing justice for the unjust? Are we doing what God would have us to do in certain situations that are criminal, or someone is being hurt in a workplace? And I think that God is calling us to seek his justice in those situations as well. So those are just some thoughts that I had.
Would you be kind enough to read that question one more time?
It's, what do I do if my workplace is unhealthy or lacks Christian ethics?
Yeah, and I would say that not to change questions, but it's not what if, it's when.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
There is no workplace that will not lack Christian ethics. Period, full stop.
Yeah.
And so how do we respond when there is a lack of Christian ethics in the workplace? Ephesians 4:32, be kind to one another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another, even as God in Christ Jesus has forgiven us. Colossians 3, which specifically is addressing work, starting in verse 22, it says, and it's addressing bondservants, but these are people who are freely given up their lives for work, if you would, to have debts paid off. Bondservants, obey in everything those who are your earthly masters, not by way of eye service as people pleasers, but with sincerity of heart, fearing the Lord. Whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men, knowing that from the Lord you'll receive the inheritance as your reward, for you are serving the Lord Christ. For the wrongdoer will be paid back for the wrong he has done, and there is no partiality. So what's it saying? It's saying when someone does you wrong, and they will, God's going to handle that. God sees all. And our job is when I go to work, I am to work remembering that whatever the company is, Kemper, Windstream, wherever you work, if I go to Windstream tomorrow to work, I am working primarily for the Lord. So I'm going to do a good job for Windstream, but I'll do a better job for Windstream when I'm serving the Lord as my primary boss. And so what do I do when they don't have good Christian ethics? Well, I'm not serving them because they have good Christian ethics. I'm serving the Lord irrespective of this, and I'm trusting the Lord that the Lord's going to handle it.
I would say through this too, one of the ways that God helps us grow in holiness is through the process of discernment, which everybody hates. But for the majority of our life, God is not going to answer questions easily for us. And we have to walk through life figuring out and discerning, okay, so what do I do in this situation that's unethical? And it can be incredibly not twisting for the Christian. Do I continue working at Target or a restaurant if they go to all gender bathrooms? Or do I work at this particular school system if they start to acknowledge LGBTQ issues? Or do I work for this pharmaceutical company or continue to work for a drugstore if they are advocating of abortifacients or things like that? And in all those situations, there are no easy answers to that. And it requires a lot of prayer. It requires a lot of just talking to other people who are Christians and wise Christians and trying to figure these things out. Thanks for tuning in to the NorthWoods Church Matters podcast. If you'd like to find out more about NorthWoods Church, you can visit us at our website, www.northwoodschurch.org. Again, that's www.northwoodschurch.org.